That's right. You're listening to another episode of the Co-Main Event Mixed Martial Arts Podcast. I'm Chad Dundas. That's Ben Folks. We're both longtime MMA journalists, and for nearly the last 13 years, we've been meeting here every week to break down all the action in the wild, weird, and occasionally wonderful world of mixed martial arts. And Ben, a lot has transpired since the last time that we were able to record this particular podcast. Some of the stuff we've already had the chance to talk about over on the Patreon page, but it probably bears repeating here. We had a flurry of fight booking news coming out last Wednesday, so we're going to try to react to some of that at the beginning of this show, and then we'll get into the absolute clusterfuck that was the main event fight between Henry Cejudo and Song Yadong in Seattle last weekend. So that should be interesting. First, though, how you doing? You were out of town last weekend. You went down to San Diego and you were drinking the Pacificos out there on the beach, eating some tacos. I know this because you sent me photos of almost all of it.
Yeah.
How was your time down there?
I told you. Listen, you didn't think I was going to go down there and drink them Pacificos and risk you going uninformed.
Well, see, I never doubted it, and that's why the multiple texts of pictures of you drinking Pacificos weren't actually warranted, although don't let me sit here and act like I didn't appreciate it, because I'd like to see you down there drinking the Pacificos, living your best life. I'm just saying, there was never a moment when I sat back and thought to myself, I wonder if Ben will make good on his promise to drink those Pacificos. I knew you would.
I feel like I was thinking there was like a trust but verify kind of situation going on there, and I just wanted to make sure. I had an amazing weekend, had a great time. Just what you need sometimes when February in Montana starts to beat you down. You get away to some sun and blue sky and palm trees, and you feel all right. And then I come back to news that Song Yadong went and poked your boy Henry Cejudo in both of his eyes.
Yeah.
Poked him in both of them at once, Chad.
Yeah, that's the Three Stooges. You don't see it a lot in MMA, but
and that's where Henry has to take some responsibility for this because, bro, my brother in Christ, you can't just bring a hand up to the bridge of the nose. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows the defense to that move, man. You take your hand, just kind of straight up and down, right on the bridge of your nose. Whoop, you block that shit.
Yeah. Pioneering fight coaches, originators, Larry and Curly.
How are you going to be the greatest combat sports athlete in history and not know that defense, not have that in your toolbox somewhere? You know?
I've got no answers, and apparently neither does Henry Cejudo, and that's why he's walking around blind today on some daredevil ass shit. Is Henry Cejudo?
Okay. I mean, I'm sure we're going to get into this, right? We got some questions.
Yeah,
about
we'll talk about poor blind Henry Cejudo later in the show. I wanted to get to this because this is the most pressing, breaking, quote unquote, news of the day that Dan Hooker is out of his fight against Justin Gaethje at UFC 313, which that's a bummer, man. That is a bummer, especially on a card that sorely needed this help, right? This is the one that's going to be going down there at T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas not too long from now, March 8th. And your main event is the light heavyweight championship fight between Alex Pereira and Magomed Ankalaev. And, continue to give props to your boy Pereira for being the UFC's most reliable go-to star at this point. Will turn around and main event a pay-per-view at a moment's notice, finally going to give us the fight against Magomed Ankalaev that some people think might be the biggest threat to his title reign. But the rest of the card, man, the rest of the card needed some help, and that's what Justin Gaethje and Dan Hooker was going to give you as the co-main, some guaranteed bona fide action. And so now to have Dan Hooker come up with the bum hand and say he was supposed to have a fight, but I busted my paw, is what Hooker says in his announcement. And this is a bummer to see this fight. Probably not scrapped. I assume we will come up with a replacement for Dan Hooker. But but this is one we've been looking forward to.
You know why it's really a bummer, at least for me personally?
Why is that?
I interviewed Dan Hooker yesterday.
Ben Folks curse alert.
And you know what else? He was great. It was a really interesting and good interview. Dan Hooker always a pretty good interview. He's very engaging, has interesting things to say, but also one of those fighters where when you're asking him a question, you can tell he's actually thinking about it. He's not just giving you a stock answer so he can get done with this interview as fast as possible. Like he's willing to give, say something like to actually think about it and then kind of explore his own mind for an answer and give it to you. And so it's really interesting. And I was looking forward to writing this story. And then this morning I wake up, news that Dan Hooker is out. And I was just like, well, Dan, I don't know why we did the interview then, because it seems like you must have known somewhere close to then. Like we were still sitting through all the interviews. It's still an interesting conversation. I've already thought of like ways I can repurpose it just because we talked about interesting topics that aren't just necessarily related to Justin Gaethje and that fight specifically. But you know how that feels, man. You come away from this interview being like, well, all right, one of these 10-minute Zoom interviews, which are often a steaming pile of trash that you're trying to just make something out of, especially when you got these fighters sitting through a whole bunch of them. Here you got an actual good one, an actual engaging one that you're interested and excited to write about. And wouldn't you know it, right after that, its news value really just drops right off a cliff.
Are you accusing Dan Hooker of sitting there doing an interview with you and not mentioning the broken paw when he knows damn well the paw is broke?
Yeah, well, I mean, he probably, I'm sure, was waiting around for a doctor's confirmation or something, probably telling himself like, it hurts, but maybe it'll be all right. I still got a couple weeks, all that. And then probably later that same day, he gets the word, all right, no, they're saying you can't go. And then he's out. And I mean, the UFC scheduled this interview last week. So probably when he agreed to it, he maybe had not even suffered the injury and then is going to turn around, wait until it's actually official. And in the meantime, probably doesn't want to raise alarms by canceling a bunch of interviews. So you go through with it. If anything, I'm more impressed with his ability to be engaging and interesting with that kind of hanging over him. But it is a bummer for me.
Yeah, and a bummer for UFC 313 and all the fans out there who wanted to see this one. We've had, now this is according to this MMA fighting story by Alexander K. Lee that I'm looking at. It appears that Rafael Fiziev has jumped on the social medias and offered to step in. Let's run it back at Justin Gaethje is his message here. And you know what? The squeaky wheel gets the grease. Sometimes if you are a UFC fighter, the best way to get what you want is to ask for it, or as my 12-year-old daughter has told me before, she has learned that sometimes if she asks for it, she gets what she wants. Something she told me when we were walking through the makeup section at Target.
Dan Severn used to say, if I don't tell you, how will you know?
This would be a big pickup for Rafael Fiziev, and one that I would be very surprised to see him get.
Well, you get a better chance of having some of these wishes fulfilled the closer to the fight you actually get, right? Because at that point, the UFC is going to be looking at it as basically you got two options. You can find another opponent for Justin Gaethje to fight, or you can try to push this fight, or Justin Gaethje just generally, to a slightly later date. You don't want to push him too far because the fight's coming up here in like 2 weeks. He's already had a training camp by this point. He's already put money into it. The UFC tries to do what they can for those guys, especially the higher profile guys, so that we don't tell you just spent all that money on a training camp for nothing. But there's not going to be as many options available who have at least a little bit of name value, who are willing to jump in there with Justin Gaethje, who can make the turnaround this quickly. And so, they're probably looking at it and being like, Justin Gaethje versus TBA would be something this card could really use. You need a Justin Gaethje fight against somebody. You find somebody that can help Justin Gaethje put on a Justin Gaethje fight, and you probably start to think like, well, it ain't perfect, but it'll do. So who knows?
And like I said, not a ton of time left before this one. I would expect you see Justin Gaethje get rebooked, and maybe it'll be Rafael Fiziev. Not to take anything away from the guy, right? He's going to come in there and put on a Rafael Fiziev type performance like the ones we've come to appreciate, and I'm sure those guys would put together another fun fight. I just thought if we're looking for an opponent for Justin Gaethje, maybe we're going to go a little bit more high profile. But you're right, maybe they got a time crunch on their hands, and maybe the first guy to put his hand up is going to end up getting called on. I don't know. Probably the biggest news, though, the last couple weeks in terms of the fight booking stories that I talked about earlier, Ben, Ilia Topuria vacating the featherweight title. He's going to go up to lightweight. We all would assume that a fight against Islam Makhachev for the title there is going to be what comes next, although Dana White has come out and said nobody asked Topuria to vacate the title and that a fight against Makhachev is not guaranteed. But come on, man. You got Ilia Topuria going up there to 155. To steal a phrase from the big homie Luke Thomas, it will be promotional malpractice if you put Ilia Topuria into any other fight besides the championship fight with Makhachev.
Yeah, what are we doing? You know? What I don't understand what the holdup would be there unless it can't be Makhachev. I don't believe that. I don't believe that Islam Makhachev is really sitting around going like, nah, Ilia Topuria needs to prove something at lightweight first. If Makhachev has any brains in his head, and it is my sense that he does, he's going to look at that and realize Ilia Topuria is going to bring some pay-per-view buys with him. That's the bigger fight than you versus Arman Sarukian. You're going to make more money off of that fight. Champion as a guy getting a piece of the pay-per-views. By all means, fight Ilia Topuria. If I had to guess, when I hear Dana White being like, hey, it's not necessarily that easy, like just, we might not go right into that one. What I'm hearing, I'm running it through my bullshit decoder, Chad. And what comes out on the other end is, what if Ilia Topuria, Dana White's words, kind of made this decision himself, kind of a unilateral choice to vacate the featherweight title and go up a division. Now, Ilia Topuria, if he goes into a fight with lightweight champion Islam Makhachev, might be like, I want pay-per-view points for this one too. And the UFC might be like, but your contract says you only get those when you are a champion and you've relinquished your title. So therefore, we are going to bill this as champion versus champion, but that doesn't mean we want to pay you like you're still a champion. That's what I could see being the sticking point. If Ilia Topuria wants you to pay him what he has frankly, clearly fucking earned, championship pay to do this championship fight, and the UFC never one to shy away from an opportunity to nickel and dime these people, even though it'll make a ton of money and a ton of profits either way, might be like, well, we don't know if we want to do that. We'd like to keep all of the money rather than just almost all of the money. So that's what I imagine would be the sticking point. That's just what my decoder has come up with.
You're telling me when Dana White starts talking about things not being guaranteed, we're probably talking about money. There's probably still some money floating around that we need to figure out who gets or who does not get, as it sometimes is the case in the UFC. Well, I mean, we'll know for sure if all of a sudden Ilia Topuria doesn't want to fight, right? Dana White will be out here saying one of these guys doesn't want to fight. Although now that I mention it, it's harder to make that argument if a guy doesn't want to fight if he goes ahead and vacates his title and moves up to another weight class with the intention of fighting the champ. I have a hard time believing you could come out and convince us that guy has decided he doesn't want to fight. We talked about this a little bit last week, but this is obviously not a particularly surprising move for Ilia Topuria. This is something that he's been talking about, and we think something that has been coming down for a while now. But it's only a little bit surprising, I guess, if you view it through the lens of him having defended the featherweight title only one time, right? Back-to-back wins over Alexander Volkanovski and Max Holloway is nothing to sneeze at during 2024. Some people's pick for fighter of the year was Ilia Topuria. But I don't know. This is also pretty fast for a guy, who hasn't really been the champion all that long. Just a little bit over a year. As we
Oh, there
Are
you
you
go.
there?
You went out and you came back in. Um, yeah, okay. Little bit over a year as far as chronological time as actual champion. But you beat the two greatest featherweights of the most recent era. You beat the last two guys to hold the featherweight title going back years, and you beat them decisively. You didn't just edge them out via decision. You knocked them both out, and that's kind of a mandate. It's not like there's nothing he could do at featherweight still. He could fight Diego Lopez. He could rematch Alexander Volkanovski. Let's be honest, though. If we are sitting here as fight fans who just want to see good fights, don't you get way more excited about Ilia Topuria versus Islam Makhachev than you do about Topuria in a rematch with Volkanovski or against Diego Lopez? Like the thing he said, where he was like, I don't want to fight people where everybody thinks I'm going to beat them. Then it seems like bullying. I want to fight somebody where everybody thinks they might beat me, which is kind of how I think a lot of people would view a fight with Makhachev right now. So I gotta respect it. And I think that just in terms of like us wanting to see big ass fights, that'd be a big ass fight. That's a bigger ass fight than any ass fight you could make for him at featherweight right now.
I'm glad to hear Ilia Topuria doesn't want to bully anyone.
No.
Anti-bullying campaign from Ilia Topuria to move
Mhm.
up to 155. So that's nice.
And the Nevada Commission didn't even make him film it. He just went ahead. That's a proactive anti-bullying PSA.
In the wake of Ilia Topuria vacating that title, we're going to get the Fallout Boy Diego Lopez against Alexander Volkanovski for the vacant strap. That one's going to go down at UFC 314 down there in Florida on April 12th. This is another one we talked about last week, and another one that doesn't seem like a surprise per se. Everyone here deserves it. Without Ilia Topuria, obviously Alexander Volkanovski, the number one contender, Diego Lopez ranked number 3, and so this is a fight that both these guys deserve. But at the same time, you and I were talking about the idea that Diego Lopez continues to sort of exceed our expectations. He was a guy that at one time we looked at and we thought, fun fighter, fun haircut, seems like a nice guy, goes out there, competes hard, will fight anybody anytime. But I don't necessarily know that anybody had Diego Lopez ticketed for the 145-pound title. So to see him go out there to fight Alexander Volkanovski for the vacant championship, it has a little bit of a dreamlike quality for me, right? Just sort of like, oh, this is real. This is real life. This is what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like when a dominant champion, even if he was only there for like a year as champion, but when he leaves the division, everybody else seems to have fresh hope, don't they?
Yeah.
You know, Alexander Volkanovski goes from looking like a guy where we were already sort of writing up the eulogy of his time on top of the featherweight division to now, shit, he might fuck around and become champion again. And then Diego Lopez, the kid with a dream, who, you know, I was realizing just the other day looking at his record, he made his UFC debut in 2023, lost to Movsar Evloev, lost a decision there in his first UFC fight. Who was sitting there then in May of 2023 being like, well, 2 years from now, this kid's going to be in a featherweight title shot? Nobody. Fucking nobody was thinking that. And he wins the next 5 straight, all while we were like, get a load of this guy. And you look up, you find yourself in a real, actual title fight. And a title fight in the sense where, like, I mean, it's going to be for the vacant title. That always knocks a little something. It's not really challenger versus champion. But if you do go in there and you beat Alexander Volkanovski, that still feels like something. That doesn't feel like, all right, you're getting to have a cup of coffee with the belt until Papa Ilia comes home. Like that, you will be able to call yourself a legit UFC champion if you beat Alexander Volkanovski to get the belt.
The last time Alexander Volkanovski had a UFC fight that was not for a title was May 11th of 2019. He fought Jose Aldo in Rio in a fight that he won by unanimous decision at UFC 237. Since then, they've all been fights for the gold, including him moving up to try to fight Makhachev for the lightweight title at UFC 284. Fight of the year candidate for some people back in 2023. And so, we thought after the loss to Ilia Topuria, the 2 losses to Makhachev when he tried to move up, we thought it might be a while before Alexander Volkanovski got another shot at the gold. And yet here we are, staring down the very real possibility that Volkanovski could win this fight and could be right back on top, man. It's crazy in this sport how the tides change sometimes.
Yeah.
You got the odds. What are we talking about odds wise for this? I would have to imagine Volkanovski is a pretty significant favorite.
Yeah. Let me look. I was just checking this out before. Here we go. Well, actually, now I'm looking at it. Alexander Volkanovski minus 155. Okay. Diego Lopez plus 130. So not quite as hefty a favorite as maybe I would have thought. Maybe we were looking at 2-1 for Alexander Volkanovski. Not so.
That's what I would have expected also. Before we leave UFC 314, though, I have to mention again the Pawn Stars meme that is Michael Chandler's career at this point, where he wanted a fight with Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor, best we can do is a loss to Charles Oliveira and then a fight against Paddy Pimblett. Come on. How did we find ourselves here, Mike? I thought we were going to see each other at the top. Now it seems like we're seeing each other, halfway up.
We're going to see each other in the middle. Mountain. I'll tell you this, though. The Paddy Pimblett fight is an opportunity. It's the fight where if you're Michael Chandler, who, even though he does his, good guy on the way to church kind of routine most of the time, which I'm not saying it's a routine in the sense that it's not real. I believe that is who Michael Chandler is. Muscle milk Mike, as Justin Poirier would call him. He has a way of generating attention and getting into, like, he can hype up a fight with people even without going over the top with trash talk. He has that kind of ability. Paddy Pimblett also has that ability, although a little bit more prone to the trash talk. Paddy Pimblett also, while he has a lot of fans, has a lot of people who have just decided early on that they fucking hate Paddy Pimblett and want to see somebody beat his ass. So Michael Chandler, you could step in here. It's going to be a high-profile fight. It's going to get a lot of attention. Both of them are probably going to do a good job building it up and selling it. And then if you go in there and you beat his ass, Chad, are you right back on the road to the top? Are you right back in at least some of these conversations?
You know what? Looking at a fight against Paddy Pimblett and saying it is an opportunity, that is some shit Michael Chandler would say. You should call him up and tell him that if he has not thought of it already, because that is some motivational Michael Chandler, go to Michael's craft shop and buy it on a poster that you can put on your wall kind of stuff. Motivational sayings. A fight against Paddy Pimblett is an opportunity.
Well, we already know, Chad, that this is not a career. It's an opportunity. So
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Fight with Paddy Pimblett it's an opportunity for you to advance your opportunity. How about that?
How about this? This is a must win.
Yeah.
Michael Chandler. I mean, you can be 1-4 in your last 5 and act like a lunatic in the last minute or so of your fight against Charles Oliveira, yell fuck it and slam him down on his back just to try to raise a little interest in your next fight, which absolutely 100% worked. But in this one, my man, you better beat Paddy Pimblett.
Yeah.
Or else, Mike, you ain't getting to the top. We're sending you back down to the trailhead if you can't beat Paddy Pimblett. We're turning you around.
Yeah. That's the flip side of the opportunity. Is it's also an opportunity for people to clown on you forever if you don't win it, basically. That's when people will go, all right, Michael Chandler, his UFC career, it either came too late or it proved that he was never on that level to begin with, and they will kind of write you off if you can't beat Paddy Pimblett here. That's the other side of him having some detractors, shall we say.
Well, if nothing is risked, nothing is gained.
Are we writing these down for Mike?
Print that and put it over the mantelpiece at the Chandler home. Why don't you? All right, last fight we wanted to talk about here before we move on to some listener mail. That boy good, Shavkat Rakhmonov, apparently will not be available for UFC 315 on May 10th. And so we are going to get Bilal Muhammad versus Jack Della Maddalena as your title fight there. And as we discussed last week, kind of a petty tone in Shavkat's tweet about it, where he made sure that we all knew that they offered him the fight first, and he was forced to decline owing to an injury or the fact that he just won't be ready by then. So he's kind of letting us know a little bit that that they offered it to him. He just can't take it, and now Muhammad and Jackie Flatnose are going to get his scraps.
I don't blame him for that, honestly. I said this when we were talking about it before, that when you are in this position where you had the title shot, you got to step back due to injury. You can't take it when they want to do it. Somebody else gets to step in. The great fear is always going to be that you'll be forgotten, that the division will kind of move on without you, and you'll have to re-earn that title shot with another fight. We've seen that happen a bunch of times in UFC history. We've seen it happen where people even get the interim title, which is supposed to be the token that you exchange in order to get the actual title shot. And sometimes it doesn't even work out that way. So I don't blame him. I'd get out there every time I was in an interview, every time I was asked anything, and be like, I wouldn't highlight it. I'd find a way to work it into conversation. People would be asking me about like how recovery is going and stuff. And I'd be like, it's going good. Obviously, after I had been offered the title shot and accepted, and then I had to pull out with the injury, it was devastating to me. Or you'd be like, so I know this is a funny story. I was telling my manager this shortly after I was the first one initially offered that title shot. Just find a way to drop it in there, just so people remember I was the guy. You all agreed I was the guy. I was going to do it. Just didn't work out that way due to the injury, but don't forget about me.
A similar situation here at welterweight as we have at middleweight, just in terms of our perception of the champions, that in the same way we keep looking at Dricus du Plessis and thinking he keeps exceeding our expectations. Somehow, Bilal Muhammad is 24-3. He hasn't lost since he got decisioned by Jeff Neal back in January of 2019. He just beat Leon Edwards for the title. And yet we keep thinking, well, he's going to lose the next one, though, right?
Yeah.
The next one, that's the one he's going to lose. And everyone knows we were all standing around thinking the next one was the one he was going to lose if it was going to be Shavkat Rakhmonov. Now you get Jack Della Maddalena. This is the first fight maybe that we've been sitting around thinking Bilal Muhammad should win this one.
Yeah, that one does seem like Bilal Muhammad is the guy who most likely to benefit from this change of plans, because it does seem like, if you're going to ask me who he has a better chance of retaining the title against, I'd say it's JDM, honestly. I mean, you probably suffer a little bit just in terms of like how high profile the fight is. It's not like Bilal Muhammad is himself a big mover of pay-per-view buys. So you probably take a little bit of a hit in changing the opponent. It does reek of a backup plan. But still, I think Bilal Muhammad probably wins that fight. And then we rebook the Shavkat one. So maybe, good news all the way around for Bilal Muhammad. Although I do think, don't you think people have sort of come around to the idea of it where we will go like, all right, whether you like it or not, you do have to admit that Bilal Muhammad is good. He is going out there and winning these damn fights.
Yeah, I mean, we do the same thing with DDP, though, right? He had to convince us that he was good.
Yeah, but that's because I think some of that is because he looks bad when winning. Like, even when winning these fights, he does not look great. A lot of the stuff that he does is ugly, and it just looks awkward. And so it's like, even while we're watching him win these fights and we know he's winning this fight, we're going like, okay, but somebody's going to come along and they're going to be able to handle this shit. And with Bilal Muhammad, I think that it's like, you're watching him in the fights. If you're actually watching those fights, you're like, he is good. He is fucking dropping Leon Edwards on his fucking head, all this stuff, but then you also, I think that it's more, I think with him, it's more personality based, that people don't want him to be good. They decided they don't like him, or decided they don't think of him as a champion. With DDP, I think it's like he has a lot of championship bearing about him outside the cage. And then you watch him throw a right hand and you go, come on, this can't be the best middleweight in the world, can it?
I'm just saying, they both have next fight, though, disease a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
Co-main event for UFC 315, Valentina Shevchenko and Mano Furio for the women's flyweight title. We will talk about that, I suppose, at a later date. We got some other stuff we want to get to this week. Remember, you're listening to the co-main event podcast proper. This show drops every Tuesday afternoon for free in your timelines and your podcast libraries. But if you want even more of the co-main event, you can find Ben Folks and myself all week over on Patreon. Hit us up at patreon.com/co-main event and get loads of extra audio and video content, as well as access to our official Discord message board where they're talking fights and a lot of other stuff literally all the time. Hit us up, patreon.com/co-main event. We got a bunch of handy tiers of patronage. Join the team, patreon.com/co-main event. Another great way to support the show is by going to our website, co-mainevent.com, and checking out our merchandise shop. We got t-shirts and hats and hoodies. We got it all over there. Stop by and pick up the best-selling Daddest Man on the Planet coffee mug while we can keep them in stock. And another one of our items, Ben, the Dundasso t-shirt or hoodie, seems very topical this week before we get into our discussion on Henry Cejudo and Song Yadong. Go get it while you can. Just go to co-mainevent.com and click at the link at the top of the page that says shop. As always, we partner with our guy, Johnny Ashcroft, on the shop. He is a brand and designer from Portland, Oregon. We can't recommend him highly enough for all your design needs. Hit him up at studiosuperconductor.com or on Instagram at studiosuperconductor. And right now, like we always do about this time, let's do a little bit of listener mail.
Listener mail.
First piece of listener mail this week comes to us from Dexter Holland, who you might know as the lead singer of The Offspring. He writes, "They've done it again. The crazy bastards have done it again. I am talking, of course, about the steaming pile that is the next UFC event, brought to us from the graveyard that is the Apex. How are they not embarrassed? This has to be the worst one yet, surely. Not a single fight to get excited about. JSFs indeed." And I have to say, Ben, when I looked ahead, when I was like, okay, we got Cejudo versus Song Yadong in the rear view. What do we got going on next week? And I saw Manel Kape and Asu Almabayev nailed it in your flyweight main event of this week's Fight Night card. I thought, surely you jest.
They don't jest, Chad. They do not jest.
Surely that could not be it. That's not what we're doing here.
Just by knowing how the UFC thinks, that when you hear the words flyweight main event, even they don't think that they're giving you the really popular stuff, the best stuff that they got. Because while the flyweights, I'd argue you could kind of take any two flyweights and have a better chance of having an interesting fight than you could in most other divisions. But also, if they take the number 6 flyweight versus the number 8 flyweight, that does feel like they're not trying super hard. If that's your headliner, if that's the best, the most high profile fight you got on the card.
In fairness, I suppose it was supposed to be Brandon Royval against Manel Kape in the main event here as a potential something approaching a flyweight title eliminator anyway. And we had to scrap that. Brandon Royval pulled out of this fight. So we get this one. But man, Dexter Holland from The Offspring has a PhD. And I got to agree with him here because this to me feels like the bottom of the barrel. This to me feels like we have finally, after years of just some fights, we have reached pardon my pun, the apex of what we're doing here. This is bad, man. This is really bad. I can't think of any other way to even say it. This is bad.
First of all, does the Osprey guy really have a PhD?
Yeah, I believe he does. I think he went back and got it after the fact.
Well, okay. In what?
I think it's something pretty impressive. Let me Google that real quick. And
Okay. Second thing I was going to say is, haven't we said this before? Haven't we sat here and been like, okay, this is it. This is the prototypical just some fights ass event. This is the new bottom of the barrel. This is a new low that they have sunk to. Surely this is the trough. And then they find a way to go lower. You know, I'm sure that we've had this conversation before where we've been like, this one is not doing anything for anybody, clearly just given up. And then you see another one where you're like, oh, they found a way to give up even more. It's just, I hope that just people learn to see these for what they are. And the fact that we're still using the Apex for some of these, if anything, makes it easier on people, because you could see last week's fight night, we went to an actual city. We got on the road. We packed up the octagon. We took it somewhere. We were doing the thing, Chad, where we're like, when we're in a city where we take the fighters out in front of like some local landmarks, and we do like where they do a face-off for the media with like the Space Needle in the background or something, which, as you and I pointed out in a private conversation we had, once you see the actual video of them setting up some of these face-offs, it looks a lot more of like a low rent product. Like we got them both out there in their hoodies to stand in front of the thing and be like, all right, let's look at them for a couple seconds, get a couple still photos, and then we can all go back to the hotel and get out of the rain. But that shows, hey, we actually think that this might be something kind of worth watching. This event's at least got some stuff on it. We're willing to take it out on the road. We're willing to sell tickets to it, all that kind of stuff. You get to turn it on, hear a crowd boo Henry Cejudo as he sits down while recovering from an eye poke, all that kind of regular UFC event stuff. Then they come back to the Apex for this one. You can look at it and be like, oh, okay, this one they did not want to try to take out on the road. This one is their version of just like the weekly content show. And I can tell, oh yeah, fight night card, number 6 versus number 8 at the top of the card in the flyweight division. It's at the Apex. All right. This one is that's the UFC telling me this one doesn't really matter that much. I can circle back, catch up on some highlights once I hear which fights are good. That kind of thing.
Dexter Holland has a PhD in molecular biology.
What?
From the University of Southern California. Earned in 2017. See, this is what you do. This is what you should do if you got the money. You should go, you could be in your band, tour the world, have some hits. Once you got the bucks, once you got the cash, once you got the secure future, follow your passion. Even if your passion for Brian Keith Dexter Holland happens to be molecular biology. I did not see that coming, I have to say.
No, I really
Same guy who wrote Pretty Fly for a White Guy. PhD
and you know
in molecular biology.
And USC was proud to take some of that Pretty Fly for a White Guy money to admit him into their graduate studies program, I'm sure.
Even though they were confident.
He got a TA? Do you think he TA'd? Is he out there at the University of Southern California at USC? Are there undergraduates who showed up young enough that they probably didn't even know? I'd never heard of the Offspring, and they took a class in molecular biology from the Offspring, dude.
I hope so. I really hope so. I was going to say, even though they were confident enough of it to take it on the road, that Henry Cejudo-Song Yadong face-off in front of the Space Needle is extra janky if you have actually been there. Right? Because it's basically like, I don't know, walk these guys out in the middle of this field, or in the middle of this like brick esplanade and take their picture in front of the Space Needle. There's nothing there. They didn't put up a stage, nothing like that. No platform, no podium. I don't know. Bust these guys over from like the fucking Hyatt Regency or whatever is the UFC host hotel in downtown Seattle. Snap a couple pics in front of the Space Needle, and then we're out.
I do want to point out though, when I sent you this video, and they're both out there in their hoodies, they're in front of the Climate Pledge arena, I think, and you could see the Space Needle in the background, whatever. And you replied to me, Song Yadong in a hoodie with a peace sign on it, looking like after English lit, he might go chill in the student union, maybe drink a Sprite.
Yeah. I mean, that's what he looked like. He looked like they found a random college student on the street and had him posed down with Henry Cejudo.
Maybe drink a Sprite in the student union.
Next question this week comes to us from Blue Eyes White Dragon, who writes, so a good friend of mine has just been hired to become a YouTube personality to cover the UFC for a small media company. He's very excited and nervous because he doesn't want to fuck it up and disappoint people. Brother, I hear you. My question to you, what advice would you give him to be different from all the other MMA guys that are knowledgeable covering the sport, being memorable, controversial, ride the middle, etc.? First of all, I'm excited to know that there are still small media companies hiring people to cover the UFC. I thought those days were over.
But it is interesting. The choice of the word cover to describe this, because he's been hired to become a YouTube personality to cover the UFC. Here's where I would have to say, is he though covering the UFC? Like, I don't think that's, if you're hiring him to be a YouTube personality, I don't know if that's really what you think you're hiring him for, is to offer like news coverage, to offer, sports coverage. You're hiring him just to like, the goal, right, is just to go out there and be somebody people want to watch on YouTube talking about this shit. It's not necessarily to provide news coverage.
And you don't know that.
Isn't that how this reads?
I will not sit here and let
a
you
YouTube personality.
You're going to besmirch the name of this YouTube personality, knowing nothing about them, or maybe everything the YouTube about personality that he's going for is Walter Cronkite. What about that?
Noted YouTube personality Walter Cronkite. Here's the thing, though. He's saying, what advice would you give him to be different from all the other MMA guys that are knowledgeable covering the sport? He's trying to say he's not knowledgeable. He's nervous about it. Maybe he is someone who is hired more for his abilities as a YouTube personality than because he knows anything about the sport, which I'm not necessarily denigrating. I mean, I am denigrating that, but I'm saying that is more and more the way it works, right? Like, that is, if there's people hiring for jobs, for like small media companies hiring for people, that is probably more likely what they are hiring for than people who actually know this sport, who go in there and do a news coverage. So you got to take that into account when you're trying to think about how you want to go about it. Because I can understand the thing of like being memorable, controversial, ride the middle, that kind of stuff. Controversial is dumb, and you're going to end up doing dumb shit, and then you're going to end up having to stand behind your dumb bullshit. And if you're the kind of person that you don't mind that, and that is even maybe something you enjoy, then fine. But if you have to talk yourself into it just because you think that is one route, because you've seen people take that route before, that's probably not for you. You're probably not going to like it that much, and you're going to feel bad about it, and it's not going to work. And so maybe what you could do is like, what if instead of trying to hide the fact that you are not that knowledgeable on this sport, what if you use it somehow? Because I think showing up and being like, tell me about this stuff that's going on, is a workable tactic in a lot of like journalistic modes of being, like you can use that even when you do know what's going on. You can use that and get some interesting stuff sometimes.
I'm not going to sit here and be an asshole like Ben Folks and assume that this person is some kind of vapid talking head who has been hired to make a fool out of themselves. But I will say, number one, this seems to be the winning approach right now with covering the UFC. This seems to be the kind of approach that gets you in the door with the UFC, is to be some manner of personality, right? To not necessarily be Josh Gross out there taking a very sober and hard-nosed approach to news reporting. What they want the schmo. That's what the UFC wants. They want to have that woman who gets the fighters to dance and stuff like that. That's what they want. So
Yeah, they don't want anybody asking about the revenue share.
no, no, they don't. If you have already been hired as a YouTube personality, that must mean that the small media company that has hired you sees something in you, right? They must see a winning personality or strategy for you as the UFC correspondent or whatever you want to call it. So I guess just go out there and be yourself, man. Use that personality that got you hired in the first place and do the best you can. And frankly, I'm gonna agree with Ben Folks. I think going out there and being like, what are you going to do to this other man on Saturday is maybe not the worst approach.
I see. I like how you first were like, I'm not going to be like Ben Folks on this, and then you agreeing with me. But what if you approach it like the unfrozen caveman lawyer sketch that Jack Handy wrote on Saturday Night Live, where you're just like, I'm just a simple YouTube influencer. I know nothing of your mixed martial arts ways. Please, by all means, explain it to me. You could get somewhere with that. Yeah, don't try and be another the schmo though. We already have the schmo. We already have some of the other stuff. You know, try to find something that already fits with whatever the YouTube personality aspect of it is. But also, and here I can't stress this part enough, not knowing exactly how knowledgeable this person may or may not be about MMA. If you're not super knowledgeable, don't try to fake it, because MMA fans love to jump on that shit. Yeah. They love to accuse others of not knowing as much as they do or not knowing as much as they claim to. They will love to hate on that shit. So don't try to just kind of get away with it if you don't know it. Instead, lean into it.
Yeah, that actually is good advice. Don't try to fake it, because they will sniff you out, and that'll be the end of that. All right, let's get on to talking a little bit about Henry Cejudo and Song Yadong here. I have a couple of questions from listeners about this topic, and we will get to those right after this. All right, Ben, I'm going to lead this with a question we got from Sean Rogers on Patreon, because this might get to the heart of the matter. He says, what do you guys think of Jason Herzog's decision in the Cejudo-Song fight to start the third round and then immediately call the fight off? It seems like this gave Song a win and Henry a loss, rather than putting a no contest on both of their records. Maybe I'm misunderstanding the rules. Seems like a weird call to me. What'd you think of this?
Yeah, I thought that was strange too, especially because, as they were talking about on the broadcast, like, do you even need to do that? Because 3 rounds had concluded. Like, do you need to start the 4th round just so you can get to that point? And if so, it would seem like we're following maybe the letter of the law and not the spirit, because you're saying, like, he's telling you between rounds, he's saying something that makes you call off the fight, but you're going to start the 4th round anyway, just so that you can immediately call it off before anybody does anything. Like, that doesn't seem like, if that is the rule, that we have to start the 4th round before we can go to the scorecards, then it doesn't seem like we're actually following that, saying we are knowingly starting the 4th round just to end it. Yeah. It also, though, it's everything about the way that one ended. It's like Henry Cejudo, immediately after the round, the first person he turns to say I can't see to is Jason Herzog. Yeah. He says it to his corner a bunch of times after that, but you can see him when he's on the way to the corner. He turns and he looks at Jason Herzog and he's like, I can't see. So that's obviously where we were headed. We were headed for calling that fight off one way or another. And I can't get mad at the decision to go to the scorecards. I don't know why we had to start the 4th round, but it's like, all right, if we got 3 of 5 rounds in the books, then and he says he can't see, do the eye poke late in the third, then yeah, sure, let's go to the scorecards. I do wonder what Henry thought those scorecards might say. Do you think that he thought that he was going to win it that way?
He didn't look like it when they were announcing the decision, right? He was looked pretty resigned to defeat as far as I was concerned before they even put Song Yadong's hand up in the air. We didn't get any kind of look of, a lot of times you see fighter be like, what?
Yeah.
Oh, how did this happen? I thought I was going to win for sure. Henry Cejudo did not do that.
Yeah, he seemed disappointed, but in the
guy,
way that he's going to be disappointed because he lost.
If Henry Cejudo thinks he got screwed, he seems like the kind of guy that would let you know, facially or otherwise. You know what? I feel so bad for these MMA refs, man. Like Jason Herzog is almost unilaterally acknowledged as maybe the best we've got out there, right? He is almost always spoken of in complimentary terms. It's hard to remember him making big mistakes. I don't think this was a mistake by any stretch of the imagination, but these dudes have to go out there ready for any damn thing to happen. You know what I mean? This isn't exactly like reffing a football game or a baseball game where generally within the scope of the rules, you kind of know what is going to happen. And frankly, within the scope of those rules, there is perhaps more clarity about what should and oftentimes does happen. In MMA, you're not only going into like the most uncontrolled and diverse area of action that you could possibly be in, but you have to like expect the unexpected. You have to be able to navigate these sometimes murky rule set, which change in some cases from state to state. And the decision you make on the fly, off the cuff, in the spur of the moment, ends the athletic contest, right? It's done once you say it, and you can't take it back. It's like if there was a pass interference call over the middle in an NFL game in the middle of the third quarter, and if you threw the flag, the game was over, right? That's basically what MMA refs are dealing with. And not only that, the decision you make might cost one guy half his money, right? If you go out there and make a weird call with one guy loses when it should have been a no contest or he wins. Now, in this specific situation, I kind of feel like it was ultimately correctly adjudicated, and no one wants to see this be a no contest, right? That's one of the dirty secrets of MMA, is that we're constantly harping on these judges, we're constantly harping on referees. But the truth is, nobody wants to see draws. Nobody wants to see no contests. We want to see definitive winners, definitive outcomes. And so if you're Jason Herzog and you think to yourself, if I start this round, then we get a definitive outcome in the fight. And if I don't start it, then it's a no contest. I kind of understand his plight there. Now, whether or not that was true, like you said, just simply doing the math leads you to believe that if they stopped it between rounds, it still would have been a win for Song Yadong. But I don't know, man. If you're choosing to go with a win over a no contest, I kind of feel your pain on that one.
Yeah, you're right though, that like the thing that stops us from maybe a more stringent enforcement of the rules, but also probably a better or more well-applied system of judging, is that same thing, that we want to see winners and losers, and we want it to feel like it's a clear winner and loser. Like, we don't want to see draws just because somebody knows how to score a 10-8 round. We don't want to see fights where it seems like the referee is the one deciding it and it feels unsatisfying there. And so that's why when somebody gets poked in the eyes, kicked in the groin, the pressure is all on the dude who has been fouled to start the fight again, because we get uncomfortable sitting around being like, is this fight going to be over? Or are we going to be denied the finality of having a winner named? And here's one where it is shitty, just because it's like, it's not like Song Yadong was going out there and irresponsibly flinging his fingers in Henry Cejudo's eyes when he got poked. It was a very understandable. Like, Henry Cejudo had been finding some success landing that lead right hand, right? Like, that was what Song Yadong was trying to defend against. He had his left hand out there trying to kind of like intercept that right hand of Henry Cejudo's, and Cejudo feinted with it and then tried to come in with a left. And it's like, Song Yadong is already moving to sort of parry or intercept that right hand that then doesn't come. Like it's Henry Cejudo shows it to him and then drops it, and he's still reacting to the feint. And so it's like as he's reaching forward for that where that right hand was, now it's gone. He misses it as Henry Cejudo's coming forward, and fingers go in both of Henry Cejudo's eyes, the double eye poke. And you could tell right away Henry Cejudo's reaction to it was that it was a pretty bad one. Credit to Henry Cejudo for one thing. He took all 5 of his minutes. Yeah. I do like to see that. I do like to see a savvy veteran move, even if people are going to boo him for it. Take all the time, see if you can get it to clear up. And then when they restarted it, he's just getting bombed on and was saying, like, I can't see where he's coming from. And that it did seem like it wasn't like Henry Cejudo just took the eye poke, wanted a way out, and said, like, this is good enough. It seemed like he was trying to restart the fight and then kind of realized in the waning moments of that round, I'm at a severe disadvantage here because now he's teeing off on me and I can't see where the punches are coming from. I'm kind of helpless here. And honestly, it seemed like Cejudo was slowing down. Song Yadong was coming on a little bit. He already seemed like the sharper, faster, like quicker fighter. And so I don't blame Henry Cejudo for being like, I don't owe it to the fans to go out there blind and get knocked out by punches that I never see coming. Like, it's unfortunate, but it is also sort of the way it goes. And oh, by the way, did anybody remember that brief time when we were having a conversation about redoing the gloves? LOL.
I mean, especially if you are already viewed the way Henry Cejudo is viewed in this sport. Literally no one would be like, what a gutsy performance by Henry Cejudo for going out there and, you know, getting knocked out, going out on his shield. This really changes my opinion about Henry Cejudo. 0 people were going to say that. Yeah. Henry Cejudo was just going to get stopped on strikes. And that was going to be it for him. All right, I wanted to squeeze this one in from Mike Garcia of voiceofgarcia.com before we're done. He writes, looking at the trajectory of Henry Cejudo's career and hindsight being 2020, would you both say Cejudo, quote unquote, retiring in 2020 after beating Dominic Cruz was one of the worst things he's done in his career? Playing hardball with Dana, overestimating his value. Now the division is passing him by and he's 0-3 since beating Cruz. What say you, fine gentlemen? We discussed this also a little bit last week. Mistake? Obviously, in hindsight, I think yes. But at the same time, that's what we're always telling fighters to try to do, right? Like, try to test your worth, hit the open market if you can, see if you can get the best deal you can get. So I don't know if I'd say mistake. I would say it did not work out the way Henry Cejudo might have imagined that it did. He probably did not think Dana White will be, signing my retirement papers on the wall of the arena as he walks to the post-fight press conference. Probably didn't think that, but it didn't work out for him. Maybe it was a bad strategy. Mistake, I guess probably, but maybe one you could have understood in the moment.
Well, I think the extent to which it's a mistake depends on our understanding of his goals there and why he made that decision when he did. Because it's like, if we understand it purely as a negotiating ploy, essentially that it was a bluff, and the UFC called it, where he was like, I'll retire unless you pay me to stay, and they went, goodbye and enjoy the rocking chair, then didn't work even a little bit. Didn't even seem to make them consider it. And so if that was purely what it was, then sure, mistake. When I talked to him and I kind of asked him about it, Henry Cejudo said something that one thing that he felt that he kind of had fallen out of love with MMA at that point. And when he was saying, hey, I might be willing to stay for more money, what he was saying is like, you can talk me into doing it as a job if the job pays better. But if I'm doing it because I love it and because I'm hungry for the next one, and also that there's money to be made in it, I'm not hungry enough for the next one anymore. Which is fair, like that's a fair position to take. And so he also said that he got more into real estate, which frankly, again, you'll recall, I was thinking about when we were thinking about how we would do our betting segment for that week, I was thinking maybe Henry Cejudo was a live underdog in this one until I interviewed him and he started talking had a lot more enthusiasm for his real estate ventures than he did for anything regarding the fight. And I went, I don't know if that's a great sign for a fighter who's already retired once and is in his late 30s. It kind of seems like he's here for the paycheck. And if you're fighting a 27-year-old guy whose heart is on fire and he wants this more than anything, I don't know, man. And he was like, I used that time in between the Dominic Cruz fight and coming out of retirement to work on my real estate stuff. And I'm in a good position now for life after fighting. And so if all that is the case, then like maybe not a bad idea. If you put the time to good use, if you made the decision for the right reasons, then sure. It does seem to paint a certain picture when you come back after 3 years away and you go 0-3.
Yeah.
Didn't get a lot of easy fights in there. Aljamain Sterling and Merab Dvalishvili, two of the guys who are best in the division. Then you get poked in the eye by Song Yadong in what had been a pretty competitive fight. Some of that is just bad breaks, but it also does seem like there's no realistic version of the future now where Henry Cejudo comes back and wins a title after returning from retirement.
Yeah. The mere fact that he stayed away for 3 years after that retirement announcement, I think hints at the idea that he had other stuff going on, that it wasn't entirely a ploy to get more money, right?
Yeah, because that lasts a year and a half at most when that happens.
Yeah, 3 years, staying away 3 years, I think it gives you an inkling that maybe he had fallen out of love with the sport or did have other motivations besides just a contract negotiation for announcing that retirement. Now, if you want to talk about mistakes, and again, hindsight 2020, I can't really blame Henry for any of this, but was the mistake not the retirement, but the mistake was the coming back part? Because if you walk away in May of 2020 after defeating Dominic Cruz, you are the champion, right? You walked away as the UFC bantamweight champion. You never lost it. You had to vacate it later that month after announcing your retirement. You would beat, at that time, Dominic Cruz, Marlon Moraes, TJ Dillashaw, Demetrius Johnson, like the guys that up to that point were kind of the standard bearers in both of the divisions that you fought in. If you were Henry at that point, you could have been like, greatest combat sports athlete of all time, Olympic gold medalist, UFC champion, blah, blah, blah. You can still say that, but on the heels of 3 straight losses, it's sadder. It's a sadder end than it would have been if you had just walked away on a lengthy winning streak and stayed gone.
Yeah, it is, but it's also, that's a common story, isn't it? Like people sometimes they gotta know that there's nothing left in the tank. They gotta find out by running out of gas.
Yeah.
And as much as we tell ourselves we like it when somebody retires on top and stays that way, like Habib did, we also don't always make it easy on them to do that. And I can understand how once you've been away for a few years, you start to think like, all right, have I really made the last money I'm going to make from fighting? Is there really nothing else I could do? You're probably also at home watching some of these fights and going, shit, I could beat some of these guys, So
yeah,
I get it. And I think that once you get enough time and enough removed from everything that happens, we do generally tend not to focus as much on what happened last as we do when we're in it, right? Like once you get a few years away, I think we'll remember the highlights for Henry Cejudo and not 3 post-retirement period.
Yeah, that could well be. All right, that's going to do it for the Co-Main Event podcast this week. Thanks everybody for tuning in and sending in your questions and everything else. We appreciate the support. Remember, join us over on Patreon. We'll be over there all week. Patreon.com/co-main event. We'd love to see you over there. If not, we'll see you right back here next week. As for right now, we are done. We are through. We are out. I appreciated getting the pictures of you drinking the Pacificos just because I knew you were still alive.
Mm-hmm.
It was like proof of life. This picture of this taco slathered in sauce with the ocean in the background and the Pacifico positioned artistically, it lets me know you're still out there.
Yeah, I mean, I would have included that day's newspaper, but people don't even really print those anymore.
That's true. I appreciated it. That that I knew not only were you having fun, but maybe also you were coming back at some point.
There you go.